So really excited for the presenters that we have today. We've got Jeff Greenberger, Jeff Perlman, and Adler Prioly. Jeff Greenberger is from Affordable Community Energy Services, or ACE. At ACE, he leads all efforts with a focus on financing, client acquisition, and servicing. Jeff Perlman is the president and founder of Bright Power. He spends his days solving the most challenging energy problems that building owners are facing. He's an experienced energy auditor, he's an energy analyst, and he's a solar energy system designer. And I love this bit. Jeff is as happy in a boiler room or on a rooftop as he is in a corporate boardroom. Super important. And then we also have Adler Prioly from the Reinvestment Fund, where he's the director of clean energy. Adler is responsible for originations, identifying strategic partnerships, transaction structuring, and closing of clean energy debt financial products. At Reinvestment Fund, he's working to identify investment opportunities that align with RF's mission to curate financial solutions tailored to the needs of both their nonprofit and for-profit clients. So before handing it over to them, I just want to say a few words about the Sustainability in Affordable Housing Lender Learning Network, which we lovingly call SALN. SALN is part of a larger effort to increase energy and water efficiency in affordable multifamily housing called Energy Efficiency for All, or EFA. EFA is a partnership led by the NRDC, the National Housing Trust, Energy Foundation, and Elevate Energy. We're on the ground with coalitions in 13 states that you can see in the map there. And in addition to state-based work, one of our strategies through EFA is to unlock financing for efficiency in housing properties. So to that end, about a year ago, the institutions that you see on the bottom of this slide launched the Sustainability in Affordable Housing Lender Learning Network. And the idea with SALN is that it's a network for multifamily housing lenders to share what's worked in financing efficiency in multifamily, as well as what hasn't worked, and just create a space to work together to employ that knowledge in the future. Over the last year, we've created a number of online resources to compile this knowledge in one place, something that hadn't happened before. So you can go online to the URL listed there and check out our resource hub, which has a lot of case studies and past webinar recordings. And if you are not already signed up, you can go to that URL and sign up for our mailing list and get invitations to upcoming webinars and new resource launches. Our next webinar is actually a lender learning exchange on climate resilience, and that's going to be happening on December 5th. So that being said, I think at this point I'm going to turn it over to Jeff Greenberger at ACE. Is that right, Jeff? Are you going to kick us off?
Yes, thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to be presenting today with two of my energy heroes, Jeff Perlman and his colleagues at Bright Power, and Adler and his colleagues at Reinvestment Fund. This project wouldn't happen without they and their teams. But I will say that the biggest hero of this story is unfortunately not part of the panel, and that's Caitlin Rood, the National Director of Sustainability at Mercy Housing. And as I think you all know, this is a story about the work that we're collectively doing with and for Mercy Housing. Bettina, next slide, please. So as background, Mercy, I think, is the largest, but they like to be careful and say one of the largest nonprofit owners of affordable housing in the United States. And they have close to 125 properties in California, which represents 40% of their portfolio. And we've been working as a team with Mercy, and particularly with Caitlin, to try to create a project that will do as much energy efficiency and water conservation work as is technically required and financially feasible as possible. What we believe now is that we'll be able to do 90 properties, around 90 properties, more than 6,000 units as this project. Many of the properties that aren't included in this project were withdrawn by Mercy because of future recapitalization events or other issues that were not related to our project. We believe that the project will cost around $6 million, half of which will be paid for by state and utility incentive programs, many of them designed specifically to help bring this kind of sustainability work to low-income housing. But that obviously gives us a head start on the capital required and the ability to do more work. And of course, we'll be hearing about the courageous involvement of Reinvestment Fund to supply the rest of the money. Next slide, please. So just to give you a little bit sense of the ACE model, we were created originally as a for-profit subsidiary of a nonprofit developer, manager, and owner of affordable housing in Chicago called Hispanic Housing Development Corp. And we were created solely to try to help similar owners overcome the challenges that they typically faced in doing comprehensive energy efficiency. Those, typically that means bringing the resources, the experience, and the expertise, but most importantly, solving the problem of bringing new capital to do that kind of work in the face of very complex capital stacks that exist and which are really locked in place for long periods between typical recapitalization. Our secret, our offering, value proposition that I know was critical to Caitlin and Mercy's selection of us to be their partner in this project, is that we promise to provide all the capital not paid for by the incentives, and this is critical, without requiring a real estate lien on their properties and without requiring them to guarantee anything other than the at the individual SPE level to pay what we're owed. And finally, another critical part of our value proposition was that we only get paid from actual measured savings realized by the customer, not deemed savings in most cases. Next slide, please. You can just hit those, still all the things. So again, to get a little deeper, we provide all the resources and expertise and the costs of installing and managing over what is typically a 10-year agreement, which includes managing and maintaining and replacement of anything that we put in, which in large part, in this case, will mean replacing a lot of lamps over the 10-year period. And there's no risk to the customer financial otherwise. They get utility savings, they get new equipment, they get O&M oversight and the cost of all that. And where we do it, and we didn't do it for Mercy, but we also give renewably generated electricity at below market costs where we do renewable energy. In exchange for all of that, again, we take a substantial portion of the actual measured savings. The share that goes to Mercy in this case is 20% of those savings, which they get, again, without cost, without risk. And they get the 10 years of O&M, the value of the O&M for the 10-year period. Two other concepts about our model. We started out with the idea of a whole tree approach as opposed to low-hanging fruit. The benefits of that is that measures with shorter paybacks, such as lighting and water conservation projects, allow us to average down the cost of more capital intensive improvements and reach, as we say, higher in the tree. Um, uh, and this has allowed us to do more scope. And if you advance the slide, Bettina, it also led us to understand that there was also a whole forest approach, which similarly, where we have proper buildings within the portfolio that present large and attractive returns from the investment, that allows us to do smaller opportunities at other projects with lesser returns, because ultimately we and Reinvestment Fund look at this as a portfolio of projects. The whole forest approach also is critical. You might call it also referred to as a portfolio approach, in that by combining a number of different properties into one project, we diversify the risk. As smart as the bright power people are, we all know that some properties will outperform and others will underperform. And the more properties you have, the better chance you have that they would average out in your favor. So that's an overview of the project. And I'm going to, I guess, turn it over to Jeff Perlman to talk about their work.
Great. Thanks, Jeff Greenberger. It's a pleasure to be here on the call. And thanks so much for hosting this NRDC. So let me tell you a little bit about Bright Power. Bright Power is a company that is almost 15 years old now, which is pretty exciting. We're headquartered in New York City. We have an office in Oakland, California, which is the office that is running much of the work under this project, since it's Mercy's portfolio in California. And we think of ourselves as a one-stop energy and water management partner for multifamily owners, developers, and operators, and I guess now in this case, sort of efficiency developers. We've been working with Mercy Housing for a number of years, but never in the comprehensive way that we're able to work with them under this ACE program, with this really creative financing mechanism that Jeff Greenberger came up with and that we're able to implement together. To deliver value to our clients, we have what we call our find, fix, follow approach. So we find energy and water waste using utility analytics and then on-site energy audits. We fix buildings to perform optimally through turnkey installations and retrofitting and then commissioning the systems that go in. And then we follow the data to ensure that all the projects achieve the goals via proprietary measurement and verification software that we've created, as well as people who go back in and make things work. And we're now over 140 people. So that's Bright Power in a nutshell. In this project, we brought some of the tools that we've created to the table to make the project really sing. And so the first of those, probably the best known, some of you on the call may be familiar with our energy scorecards software, which is the utility bill-based analytics platform that gives us the ability to compare buildings to each other based on the amount of energy they're consuming and some other basic characteristics. For this project, we also created what we call the tranche tool, which enabled us to stack up the properties for this project next to each other. And I'll show you a screenshot of what that looks like. It was how we were able to make estimates of what the savings were going to be across the whole portfolio without actually setting foot into the properties. And then we used our EUM, which is our in-house developed energy audit tool that enabled us to calculate the projected cost and savings of the projects and the improvements that we're proposing. Next slide, please. So this is a screenshot of energy scorecards. It's just a sample property. And you can see we take the utility bills and are able to run weather-based regression algorithms that are built into energy scorecards, and that enables us to score the building overall. This is what's getting an A, so it's a very low energy user. But you can see that it gets B's, A's, B's, and C's in different categories. And so in this case, while the energy is pretty efficient all the way across, the water is actually somewhat less efficient. And so there's a real opportunity for savings in this particular building on the water side. So we were able to use Mercy Housing has been using energy scorecards for a number of years, and so we were able to use that as the base set of data that enabled us to identify which buildings were the best candidates for which kinds of improvements. Next slide, please. So this is also a screenshot from energy scorecards. This shows a distribution of a portfolio. So each little green dot here is a different building, and so you can see, typical portfolio of buildings is spread out across the A's, B's, C's, and D's. So, the properties that are in the D range are going to have likely more opportunities. They should get more investment for energy savings than the ones that are already quite efficient would be in the A range. Next slide, please. And so then we prioritize the portfolio. So this is just an example where we've taken a portfolio, looked at the information that we have about the building. We also looked at incentive information, so I'll show that to you in a second, meaning where there's money available from utility companies or from the local government agencies, et cetera. And so we use that to prioritize based on energy performance and available incentives, which properties deserve the first set of energy audits so that we can make those improvements. This is the next slide, please. This is the tranche tool I mentioned. This is something that we developed for this project where we were able to look across the whole portfolio, and you can see, I don't expect you to look at all the little words on the page, but there's a bunch of properties and they have a bunch of different characteristics, and we were able to use this to say, okay, well, these properties should happen first, these should happen second, these have an incentive available from PG&E, these have a Bay Rent incentive, these are LIWIP. Those are all different kinds of programs that can help pay for the retrofits. And as Jeff Greenberger said, some properties got a large amount of incentive money, some got a small amount of incentive money, and that, but for this project, that all kind of evens out across the different properties. One of the nice things about this whole forest approach is that we're taking the opportunities across the portfolio and are able to access them by treating it as one big project. Next slide. So I mentioned incentives a couple of times. These are 4 of the most heavily used incentives in California for this Mercy Housing retrofit project. California is very fertile ground for incentives for energy efficiency. The Low-Income Weatherization Program, which is California's version of a program that is national, called the Weatherization Program, is very rich in its incentives. So some of the first projects that we did were almost completely paid for, or completely paid for by the Low-Income Weatherization Program. There's also a Southern California program, Bay Area programs, and then PG&E, the utility, has a program as well. So we've been very creative in accessing those dollars and using them as leverage against the debt that was provided by a reinvestment fund. Next slide, please. Here's an example of one of our energy engineers. There's Amy out there in the field actually auditing a piece of equipment, understanding how it performs and what recommendations we might be making to make it perform better. Next slide, please. And so after we've done the portfolio prioritization, the energy scorecards evaluation, we looked at the tranche tool, portfolio prioritization, looked at the incentives, gone on site. For each property, we come up with a more detailed scope of work. We used the tranche tool to estimate what the savings were going to be, and did that for the whole portfolio and use that to secure the financing. But then when it actually comes to deciding discretely what's going to happen in each property, we have to make a site visit and come up with a scope of work. And this is what comes out of that EUM tool I mentioned on a previous slide. So this is an example of a lighter scope of work. Some of them actually had boiler replacements and other things. This one has kind of your basic scope. We've got lighting upgrades for both common areas and apartments, some domestic hot water improvements and the recirculation, and then some water efficiency measures. This is kind of a scope that you see in many of the properties. As I said, some of them got some more additional measures done to them. And so you can see here, you've got what were done, these four different energy improvement measures. You've got what it's going to cost. You've got an incentive amount. This one is on the lower end of incentives. There's only about 15% incentive money available for this project. You see the projection of savings. You see the payback overall. This is a 3.9-year payback, so it's a pretty good payback for this set of measures with an ROI of 26%, it looks like. And so this is a nice scope for a sort of an average scope for one of these projects. And next slide. And this is just an example of the kinds of measures that were done across the whole project. So you can see there are a number of HVAC, so heating, ventilation, air conditioning measures that are being done across the project, from steam traps. And we did some heat pump water heaters, which is a very highly efficient electric water heating technology. We did some of the first projects in California using that technology. I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to lessons learned. But we also worked with some older heating systems. Believe it or not, in San Francisco, they still have some steam heating systems in the same way that we have in New York, Chicago, and some of the other older cities. A lot of lighting upgrades, some appliance upgrades in some cases, and then water efficiency improvements. A lot of low flow fixtures. One of the kind of sleeper measures that's actually very impactful is this one called replace tub diverters. So for those of you who've ever taken a shower, pulled the little stopper in the faucet up to try to make the shower go on and have the water dripping down onto your feet or sort of going down the drain, that's the tub diverter. And so actually replacing those things can be a big savings of hot water. And next slide, I believe I'm going to hand it off to Adler now.
Thank you. We could go to the next slide, please. So this is Reinvestment Fund. Before I speak to the slide, I just want to acknowledge that Roger Clark has been a huge part of our work at Reinvestment Fund since the 90s. He's helped us raise some private capital and public dollars that we've used to create a number of revolving loan funds, which helped get our clean energy practice started. And so since 93, we've provided over $120 million in clean energy financing for a range of projects, including energy efficiency generation, portfolios of consumer loans, and real estate energy measures. We have about $1 billion in assets under management. We're AA rated by S&P, AAA plus from Ares, and we have a lot of experience in lending energy efficiency projects. We first started off doing gut rehab energy installations and have moved up the chain to do projects with energy services companies with shared savings agreements on a range of projects, from community facilities to hospitals. And the last point is we, over time in working on these projects, we've developed a fair amount of analytical capacity and expertise. So we understand the savings models. We will routinely use our own third party to corroborate energy savings. We want to understand the technical component of what is being engineered into facilities. And so we're usually looking to understand those parts, understand their warranties, and the products that are being put into that we're financing. Next slide, please. I just wanted to speak to a few financing and structuring challenges that were unearthed in this opportunity, and come up in pretty much every deal, but the flavor was specific to this project in particular. In terms of the first, underwriting new companies, we pretty consistently work with early stage companies, so that's part of the types of financing that we offer. What helps in the underwriting is that the project is really a joint venture between two firms with leaders who are seasoned and experienced. And this joint venture was formed from folks who had the right combination of backgrounds. You know, ACE's leadership under Jeff Greenberger basically has sort of global corporate structuring expertise to deliver on contractual relationships with energy services companies, that expertise. And then Bright Power under Jeffrey Perlman as a firm with over a decade plus experience in engineering, technical advisory, and execution. And so when we're underwriting new companies, we pay particular attention to leadership and track record. And in this case, that was pretty exceptional. In terms of the business model extension for Bright Power, as Jeffrey Perlman mentioned, Bright Power has done a lot of work in energy auditing and started off in that particular area, and over time has sort of expanded the offerings that it has been able to put out in the market. So in this particular instance, we understood that the team had the analytical capacity. The team to execute hadn't been involved in long-term installations with measurement and verification activities under long-term contracts, and so we spent a lot of time sort of working with ACE and Bright Power to understand kind of the programmatic and legal burdens of doing work in this type of ESCO format. And I think that supported understanding on the part of all parties for what structure could work for this particular opportunity. And then third, in terms of underwriting Bright Power's energy savings, Jeffrey Perlman has pretty much hit it on the nail. I think the inventory of buildings that were available through the precedent analysis that Bright Power's done over the past 15 years has helped to really sort of sharpen the level of insight into what energy savings will look like. And a critical part of understanding the integrity of systems and delivering projected savings was a huge part of this project. And so even after underwriting, we have touch points to review that data through measurement and performance in multiple parts of the project. And then last, in terms of just structuring around multiple contracts, in the past, we've oftentimes worked with one ESCO and provided a loan to that ESCO for work that is being completed with a number of usually subcontractors. But in this case, there was basically a joint venture between ACE and Bright Power, and so there were layers of kind of how guaranteed had to be structured that required a little bit more of an intensive kind of time spent with each of the third parties and attorneys to sort of align incentives and place the risk accordingly. But it was very much sort of in the spirit of making this look as much like some of the ESCO opportunities that we've done and have been very successful. So I'll turn it over to, I think, Jeffrey Perlman to talk a little bit about kind of project management and early results.
Okay. Jeff Greenberger, do you want to jump in on this, or should I just?
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Great. Excellent. So this is a slide just to help everybody see what the whole mapping is for this project. Something that I actually created internally for my company, but I'm happy to share with everyone here. So you can see all the players, right? So we've got ACE, you've got Bright Power, you've got Reinvestment Fund. There's this project-specific entity that ACE created called ACE Mercy California. And then there's Mercy Housing, of course, which owns all those properties, represented by A, B, and C here, but obviously there's almost 90 of them. And so the orange lines that you see there are the initial flow of funds. So Reinvestment Fund funds ACE Mercy LLC, and the utility and government incentives help come mostly directly to Bright Power, and then all those funds come together and enable us to pay subcontractors so that we and our subcontractors can actually perform the retrofits, the upgrades to the building. Once the retrofits are completed, then they begin to generate savings. So if you can click one more time, Bettina, as those properties A, B, C, all the way through 90 generate savings, large portion of those savings gets paid back to the ACE Mercy LLC, which then repays Reinvestment Fund for its debt service and pays Bright Power for ongoing operations and maintenance services, and obviously ACE itself, ACE Affordable Community Energy Services, actually gets some payment out of the project as well. And so overall, that's what the map looks like. Yes, we hope, exactly. And I guess the last line, if you click one more time, Bettina, is the ongoing operations and maintenance services that Bright Power is providing. And so that's that red line that fills it out. Jeff Greenberger, did you want to say anything else about this before we move on?
No, we might.
Okay.
We'll catch up later. Thank you.
Excellent. Great. Okay, so we'll now go to the next slide.
Yeah, before we do that, this is Bettina. I do want to just bring up one question that came in. I think it's relevant to this slide. The question is about who's receiving the savings. Are any of the savings staying with the properties themselves, or are they flowing to first this SPV and then to Mercy, corporate office?
This is Jeff Greenberger. I'll take a crack at answering that. Our agreements with, first of all, we have a utility savings agreement with each of the special purpose entities that own the properties. We don't have a master agreement other than in principle and goodwill with Mercy at the corporate office. And under those utility savings agreements, of the actual savings, ACE is paid, and I'll explain the mechanics in a second, 80% of those savings, so that we can pay off Reinvestment Fund for its debt service, pay, as Jeff said, the operating O&M costs to Bright Power, replace anything that or repair anything that we've installed over the 10 years. And if we're lucky, then a little bit might come up to the top of this chart. I can't remember what else I was going to say, but what happens is that hopefully in all cases, the individual Mercy properties receive utility bills that are less than what they were before we did the work. They pay those bills, and then they pay a bill to ACE for our 80% share of the savings. So I hope that's a longer answer. I hope the answer to the question, we answered the question, but to repeat, 20% go to the properties. The way that Mercy housing is set up, none goes up to the Mercy corporate, at least at this point.
Gotcha. And Jeff, just to be clear, we have one related question here following up. Did those savings include any tax credits that are applicable in the upgrades?
It's a good question. Tax credits, apply to renewable energy. There aren't tax credits related to the work that we've done for Mercy, but if we were, as we do with other customers, to do renewable energy, then the tax credits would pay in general, would serve the same purpose as the incentives do in this, by reducing the costs and allowing us to either, in that case, probably reduce the cost of the electricity to the various properties more significantly. But in no case does the capital, in our experience, go to the customer that comes from tax credits. If there was a desire to do that, we'd explore it, but I'm not sure that's the right way.
Okay. Great. We've got a number of other questions that have come in, but I know you guys have some lessons learned slides that you want to get to and might start to address some of these questions. So thanks for letting me jump in there.
Good.
Great. No problem. Okay, we'll go to the next slide and just give you a sense of what happens after the work is done. So here's some of those heat pump water heaters I mentioned before. Here's Daniel Chen from our staff smiling, happy that the heat pump water heaters are installed. So we go on site and make sure that the things actually were installed properly. We'll go to the next slide. And here's an example of what it looks like after a project's done. So we're able to, in energy scorecards, look at the utility bills and see what the impact is. In this case, you see the lighter blue bars are the energy performance before any of the improvements were done, and the dark blue bars are what it looks like afterwards. In this case, this property is saving almost 23% on their water bill. Next slide, please. And this is just an example of what we're seeing in the project. So we now have the first 6 completed properties from phase 1 are showing measured savings of 9% on electricity, 29% on gas. Water's a little bit low. We can talk a little bit about that in lessons learned. Phase 2 has 9 completed properties. Again, electricity's down single-digit percentage. Natural gas is down by a large double-digit percentage. Water down a single-digit as well. And then the phase 3, 12 completed properties. This is actually just getting completed now, so we don't have the final numbers in yet. But these are some of the early projections. So we can see that we're actually generating savings, which is exactly what we want to be doing. Next slide. And then this is just some images of some of the properties themselves. You can see it's a pretty wide array of properties, from more of the urban property you see on the left to more of a larger sprawling complex like you see on the upper right. Okay, lessons learned.
So this is my slide. I would start with again, tremendous thanks to Adler Reinvestment Fund and his colleagues. He touched on some of the difficulties of making the loan that we said we would get in our promise to our customers. If you think about the way lenders appropriately think, they first say, well, what's the cash flow that will repay our loan? And Reinvestment Fund is out there in front on being able to evaluate and recognize the savings that could come from energy efficiency and water conservation. And I think they understood the portfolio approach, which we'll talk about in a minute. Second lesson learned is there's always something that's going to come up, but it can be worked out. Jeff Perlman just showed the current water savings, which are very much below what we had expected. But what turns out is that the shortfalls don't reflect what ACE will actually be given credit for. As an example, when we saw a spike in water at one of the properties in the San Francisco Tenderloin district and looked behind it, we discovered that property management quite appropriately decided they needed to use water to wash down the sidewalks in front of the building every morning. So there will be adjustments made so that the savings that our work was given credit for will be increased. Irrigation protocols also have affected those things, so we're working them out. And it really goes, if I jump ahead of myself, to the last bullet, which is this only works, as Adler, I think, talked about, if there's a strong partnership among the players that is transparent and objective, because in these cases, the cases of the water, we needed mercy, as they have, to understand that certain performance was due to their activities rather than ours. The portfolio approach does work. We have projects that are underperforming, and we have our properties that are underperforming in our projections, and some that are overperforming. And all in all, we're ahead of projections. But we still believe that there's a lot to improve as we sort of go through the process of reviewing utility bills, sending the experts from Bright Power out, and finding ways to improve shortfall performance. And because of this, and because of their involvement in the installation of the improvements in the first place, the internal stakeholders, particularly those at the properties and the people who manage them, are a very important success factor. We need their cooperation in scheduling audits and then installation appointments, telling us what is working and what's not before we do the work. And they are really our early warning system for performance issues. Jeff showed a picture of the heat pump water heaters, which was somewhat of an experiment for us, but encouraged by the LIWIP program. And they generated a number of issues in the beginning in terms of performance of delivering hot water to the residents, which we take very seriously, and we had to work closely with the properties to resolve that and make the residents happy again. I think that covers our lessons learned. We'll probably be commenting about it in some questions later. So next.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. So this is Jeff Perlman from Bright Power. Some of our lessons learned, I mean, the big one is it's all about communication. I mean, this project has a number of players. We have obviously Mercy Housing, and it's not just Caitlin, but there's the people on site. There's the ACE, which is Jeff Greenberger, but he also has the team behind him. There's my team, which is multiple people, and we have both people on our East Coast office and West Coast office working on this project. And then there's RF, making sure that we get the information to them that they need. And so it's we've had a lot of communication, and it's been critical that particularly when we're doing something as innovative as this, that we really work together. And we need all these different players. It takes a team in order to make a project like this work, because there's people who have to be on site, and there's people who need to be able to crunch the numbers and all that. One of the most exciting developments for us here is that by working at a portfolio level and doing the analysis across the whole portfolio, infused by our on-site knowledge of some of the properties, is that we were able to get a portfolio level financing for a project without having to visit every single property before the financing was able to be given. So we were able to use our analysis and our algorithms to give RF enough confidence that it made sense to lend into the project. And so we're excited to see where these tools that we've been able to create will take us for projects going forward. The third bullet, hybridizing and using new technology, is a really important one. I mentioned those heat pump water heaters before. That's a technology that has not been deployed in this country, although it's been deployed in other countries at the scale that we've been deploying it at some of these buildings. And it works great, but there are various nuances to the particular devices, to the way water flows through some of these buildings. And so when we say hybridize, like a hybrid car, one of the things that we've tried to do to minimize the risk of new technology is that rather than just putting in a new water heater and ripping out the old, we will now keep the old water heater there and have it as a backup. And so it's available in case there's any issues with the new technology. And so we think that that's a safer way to be able to deliver savings, but also to be able to deliver the level of performance at the property as some of the kinks get worked out with new technology. And then the last one is, simple measures aren't always simple. And that's definitely been a lesson here. I've got 3 examples for you. One is this thing that we call rogue bypass or cold water crossover flow. This is what happens when, because of pressure differentials between hot and cold water, you end up getting cold water going into the hot water line. Or in some cases, I guess, hot water can also get into the cold water line. So occasionally you'll have hot water in toilets. It's most often caused when there are either faulty shower cartridges or O-rings in the shower bodies, or sometimes in the basements when there's a slop sink and you basically have the two sides, the hot water and the cold water, connected to each other. And so, sometimes you don't really notice crossover flow until you start putting in more water efficient fixtures that use less water. Then it becomes more pronounced. And so we've now added a bunch of checks to our auditing process to determine if there is crossover flow and try to isolate where it is. For some of the earlier Mercy properties, we're having to go back and diagnose the causes of the crossover flow so that we can ensure that the systems we put in are working properly. Another point here is about scale from water hardness. So water hardness is the existence of dissolved minerals like calcium and magnesium in the water supply. And it causes a problem for plumbing systems because you get buildup of lime or scale on the boilers and distribution systems. And in California, it's very much city by city whether there's going to be what's called soft or hard water. So San Francisco has soft water because it gets water from the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir, but San Jose has rather hard water because it has dissolved minerals from the groundwater. And so we encountered some initial issues with some of the systems because we were getting some of that scale. And so we now incorporated water hardness testing to all of our energy audits, because we can't just assume because we did a property nearby that the water quality is going to be the same. And then the last one I wanted to point out is that, lighting is a pretty common measure. But there are a lot of different kinds of fixtures. There's always new LED fixtures coming out, and there's some ideas in the industry about whether when you're retrofitting an old fluorescent fixture, whether you want to leave some of the ballast, some of the guts of the fixture in, or whether you want to take them out entirely. And so I think we've come to the conclusion that you want to take out the guts, the ballast, because sometimes those ballasts burn out after you go in and change the lights, and no one's happy about that. So so we've learned some lessons about how to make sure that we do these projects at scale, and that sometimes the simple things like water and lighting have more nuances to them, particularly when you're doing them at a scale like we're doing them in this project. And now to Adler.
Sure. So a few points. The first is just documenting construction management activities with the third parties. And so we anticipate that this would be sort of, a year plus time to construction completion. And to help, ACE and Bright Power to schedule for construction delivery, we've collaboratively developed sets of milestones for monitoring pre-development activity, the scope of work required for each project before, on the reinvestment fund side, we can advance funds. And we jointly documented this process pretty extensively in our legal activities, just to bring clarity to each of the parties for management of resources for the project, and also for reinvestment funds requirements around before we put money out of the door. And then second, in terms of planning and executing a more extensive portfolio management process, Reinvestment Fund typically has projects with more predictability in construction delivery, more linear process to get to construction completion. This project is far more iterative. The scope can change in pre-development more routinely. And so for a project of this magnitude, we had to plan to be more involved in the construction disbursement, the portfolio management, the budgeting and monitoring in a way that is more involved than our standard projects. And we have a lot of confidence in ACE and Bright Power's technical execution, but this is just really large, and so we want to just be more involved in other projects, and I think both parties have found that to be pretty appropriate. And then last, identifying potential legal complexities. Typically this is something that we do, but the full nature of kind of this project, the joint venture between ACE, Bright Power, and Mercy, kind of only emerged as we were working towards closing, as well as kind of, allowing the sort of the business model for Bright Power to fully emerge. So ideally, this is something that we do earlier, but just given a lot of the upfront analytical work going into underwriting this, looking back, I don't think this is a reflection on the partners, but more of a reflection on, the magnitude of this project, the scale of it, and some of the limits of what we could lift at one time in each phase of underwriting and diligence. But I would say, we were able to get to the finish line without many hiccups, and as the project is being developed, we've had a very close relationship, more than other borrowers, because we also have an interest in this being successful and want to provide the full resources and guidance even after we've approved this and memorialized it in our legal documentation. So I'll pause there. I think those are the end of my comments, and I think we're ready for Q&A, Bettina.
And a photo. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. This is fascinating, such a cool new project, and I'm apparently not the only one who thinks so. We've got a number of really good questions that have come in, and we have under 10 minutes, but I'm trying to combine a few of them, and hopefully we can get to most of them. So I'll just kick us off. big picture question. Jeff Perlman, I think I'll throw this one to you. Just to be clear about what the status of this project is, you mentioned there are a number of phases to get through all 90 properties. I think one of your slides showed that there's been about 15 properties so far. So you're on phase 3 now, and how many phases will there be? And relatedly, there's a question about, are there results? And I think you've answered that question with your results slide.
Yeah, so there's actually more like 30 properties that are complete. Those were not cumulative, those numbers on that slide I showed. Basically, phase 1 actually was broken into 2 parts, but phase 1 was sort of 6 plus 12. And then there's a phase 2, it's about 23. Phase 3, which is 38, which is underway right now. And then phase 4, which is the last 80 properties. So, I'm sorry. Those were cumulative numbers. Phase 4 is the last 40 properties. There's about 15 in phase 3 that's happening right now, or that's going to kick off now. There's about another 10 or 11 or so that are just finishing up right now. That's phase 2. Sorry about that. So we have real results from the first 15 to 20 properties.
Great. All right, well, we'll keep an eye out for results as they come out on the other ones as well. Thank you. Jeff Greenberger, maybe this one to you. Can you comment on the metering configuration of the properties in the portfolio? Are they master metered generally? Any of them individually metered? In which case, is there any instance in which savings are flowing directly to tenants in this project?
Great question. Unfortunately, I think all of the properties are metered in what is in this world probably typical, where water is a single bill or bills that are paid for by the owner, and the electricity is separately metered. So in general, and underlying this is a split incentive that exists in these properties, we are able to do things that help the properties themselves reduce their costs and transfer money that would otherwise go to the utilities to maintaining the properties and providing better service to the residents. The exception is that, as Jeff Perlman showed, there are cases where we have, because the incentives have been sufficient to justify, from our point of view, to put in energy efficient appliances in the properties, which don't provide any economic return to ACE, but which is part of our mission and does benefit the residents.
Got it. Thank you so much, Jeff. And Adler, I think moving to you, if you can answer, at what percentage are you underwriting projected savings? If you can share that. Are you discounting to some degree the anticipated savings and underwriting a portion?
Yeah, so I think the way we think about it is we like to look at the optimistic scenario and then stress test that and try to understand, to what degree our debt will be able to be repaid under, more severe circumstances. So, we discount a pretty significant amount that's within reason for the project and use that as we bring the project to loan approval.
It seems to me, for the audience, Bettina, that it's something that hasn't been said, which hopefully will be okay with Jeff and Adler. I think one of the great gifts and one of the things that Reinvestment Fund brought into this is that they looked at the project as understood that they needed to figure out a way to de-risk the loan in ways that conformed with what was possible. And it really started with making sure that there was a sufficient cash flow, and they came back to us, and fortunately our partners in this were cooperative, and they said two things. One is you need to take away the rate risk on utilities, because we basically measure the reduction in consumption and multiply that by the prevailing utility rates from time to time. So the solution to that was going back to Mercy and saying, you need to give us some protection on the downside and agree to a floor on utility rates. And because they were familiar with doing that in their power purchase agreements for solar, they agreed to that. So we satisfied that quest. And then they said, we need Bright Power to guarantee consumption reductions to a sufficient extent to cover our debt service and operating costs. And after very long and thoughtful negotiations with Bright Power and Jeff Perlman, we came to agreement on that. So it's important to understand that Reinvestment Fund was both diligent in protecting their investment, but also creative in finding ways to get comfortable with it.
Sure. I would only also add that, having, Bright Power as a partner with a lot of technical expertise, it was different than perhaps writing a newer company that had a little bit less of a track record. And so there was some imputed confidence in some of the projections that were brought to us.
Thanks, Jeff and Adler. I know we're coming up at 1 o'clock here, and we haven't gotten to all the questions. There is one that I'm particularly interested in, so I'm going to just use my privilege to go over a minute or so. And the question is, on the EUM slide, the financial performance tracking has a column for added property value. Someone noted that and is wondering, if that is also factored into the overall financial equation, Adler, for you or others, if you're using that information in some way.
The short answer, this is Jeff Perlman, is that this project I don't think is looking at the added property value, because that doesn't really go into the financing the way this is financed. That's a slide and a layout and a column that we use for many of our clients, and probably more applicable in situations where the owner is paying for the retrofits themselves and then are able to kind of realize that added property value directly. Mm-hmm. If anyone else wants to jump in.
I think that's right. We did hope that Caitlin would shared that with her colleagues as she went through the long and amazing process of gaining buy-in at all levels of her large organization. But it didn't go into the financing. Because, again, obviously because Bright Power and we did not have a lien on the real estate, which is I know we've gone over. I just want to say that we have up here the screen with all of our contact information, and I know we love questions, so if there's any questions that you think ACE can answer, please call or send them to us, and I'm guessing Jeff and Adler feel the same way.
Absolutely. And then one other thing that I would just add on the property value thing is that you see folks like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac with their green financing programs actually, using that kind of a calculation in their underwriting to enable them to lend more proceeds into properties that are making energy efficiency upgrades. So we do see precedent for using that kind of added value calculation in lending into properties. It just isn't as relevant for the way this project is financed. Anyway, I agree with what Jeff Greenberger said. Certainly happy to answer any questions anybody has about this. I really want to thank Bettina and NRDC and my co-panelists for organizing this thing.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to add to the property value, even if you guys aren't using it now, we all know that just creating a track record and having all the information on these successful projects is so valuable for future reference. So thank you so much for doing that. And a sincere thank you to Jeff and Adler for sharing about this project. We didn't get to all the questions, so I'll definitely be making some connections here in the next couple days to make sure that our attendees get their questions answered. And like I said, a recording of this webinar will be posted online, and you'll get it in your email to share with your colleagues. So that's all for now. Hope to talk to you guys again soon on December 5th on our next call on climate resilience. And I hope everyone has a great day. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.